Hey there, before we get started with this episode, I want you to notice how crisp and clean my guest Andrew Crowell sounds. Andrew has been a guest on the Modern Financial Advisor podcast a few times before, and one thing I noticed, and maybe you'll notice too if you go back and listen to his prior appearances, is he used to sound a bit tinny and echoey. So for this episode, I sent Andrew a high-quality, fully assembled microphone setup from podbox.com. All he had to do was open the box, take it out, and plug it into his computer, and he was ready for our podcast recording session. And as you're about to hear, he sounds fantastic. Whether you're a podcast host wanting your guests to sound their best, or you're going to be a guest on someone else's show, you really should swing by podbox.com and give one of our mic setups a try. Your audience will love the way you sound. Okay, now on to the show. Hey there, it's Mike Langford. Welcome to another episode of the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. This week on the show, Andrew Crowell, Vice Chairman of Wealth Management at D.A. Davidson, is back with me for a fascinating new take on estate planning. Instead of thinking about estate planning through the lens of who gets what if we thought about the concept through the perspective of helping clients establish pre-made decisions for their heirs? As you'll hear in my chat with Andrew on this new perspective, it opens up the doors to a host of new opportunities for your clients and alleviates a lot of stress for their loved ones. As always, Andrew really brings some great stuff to the table. I think you're going to love this conversation. Now, before we get rolling, please make sure you subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Amazon, the YouTubes, or wherever you like to get your podcast jam on. And if you have a question or a suggestion for a topic or a guest for the show, hit me up. I'm basically at Mike Langford everywhere on the internet. And you could also just shoot me an email, podcast@finservmarketing.com. Okay, let's get to the conversation with Andrew Crowell. Well, Andrew Crowell, welcome back to the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. So wonderful to see you today. And, for those in the audience, Andrew is our first pancake using a different recording solution today. So thank you very much for your patience, Andrew. It's great to see you.
Thank you for having me, Mike. Good to be back.
I know, it's good to be. It's so hilarious how often you run into technical issues and you get really frustrated. But as a friend of mine once said, he's like, hey, do you realize how much of a miracle it is that some of the technologies we have today and that they actually work, that you could talk to another human being who's on the West Coast while you're here in Austin, Texas, on a screen live? This is amazing. This was like sci-fi stuff when we were kids.
It is amazing. It is science fiction, and the pandemic just accentuated it. We were able to convene family meetings, whether people were in the same country, the same state, the same city, and we could see each other and talk to each other. And I think that's one of the things that got us through the pandemic. And as advisors, we didn't have to lose touch with people. It was awesome.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's breathtakingly awesome that you could chat face to face with a human being, regardless of where they are. But it doesn't make it any less frustrating when you're like, hey, it's not working the way it's about. We're just getting patient. Anyway, I'm so grateful you come on the show, and you've been like one of my favorite guests, and so you're always welcome to come back on the show. And when you and the team reached out, I was like, oh, what are we going to talk about this time? I'm always excited. Andrew's always got good stuff. So today we're going to be diving into some estate planning trends and things that advisors should be thinking about, and clients, frankly, should be thinking about as they move forward. And I think the area that we should kick things off is kind of something you referred to is a concept. The term you used was pre-making decisions for your heirs and loved ones. I think, I'm paraphrasing, maybe not an exact quote, but I really love that. And I have never really thought about it that way before. So I thought maybe we could kick it off there, because to me, that's just that is what we want to do. We want to make it easier on our loved ones and heirs. When we think about estate planning, that's what we're doing for people, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. What really hit home for me, Mike, the first time was when, at the time, my mother was in intensive care at Keck USC Hospital. And the nurses at the nursing station were asking if I had a copy of her advance directive. And I'm scared to death. I've gone to ICU to see my mother, wondering if she's going to be alive. And
Right.
they're asking me for a document. And I knew they needed it, but I thought, wow, I should have gotten ahead of this one. And it just made me think, boy, there's lots of families that probably aren't prepared for lots of eventualities. And so having those conversations early while people are thinking clearly and they're not in an emotional state of duress. Here's what I want to happen. Here's the way I've mapped things out. Here's the way we've titled accounts. Here's the way we've designated beneficiaries. All that seems so common sense.
Yeah.
And yet, none of us wants to think about end times or eventualities like that. So we postpone them. And I just think having family meetings and having those conversations soon and often helps prevent a lot of emotional duress down the road.
I like that you said, the preventing emotional duress, because very frequently, I think when we think about estate planning, we think about what do we want to leave our loved ones? What legacy do we want to leave them? What tangible goods or, economic benefits do we want to leave them, or what have you? But less frequently, I think, is the conversation centered around like, what pain do I want to avoid for them? What kind of, because very often, and I think most people can attest to this, when somebody goes and there's a mess to clean up, and it, literally and figuratively sometimes, right? Of like, oh, look at how much stuff mom and dad have. That house has to get emptied, or these financials are just a disaster. I got to sift through all this paperwork. Well, where's mom's will? Where's this thing? What is that? Whatever. It's a lot of work. So I like this framing. In addition, of course, we are going to talk about some of the more traditional estate planning stuff, I think, later in the show. But I think we'll be covering more of that, like avoiding pain stuff here early on.
I think that's right. And, I used this example, I believe, on a prior podcast, but speaking of my late mother, she was very explicit in her in and out of the hospital days, telling my brother and me, whatever you do not wake me up on a ventilator. Okay, it seemed like an improbable outcome, but fast forward to COVID, she did contract it. She was sadly the target demographic of that. And when the Keck team told us, the damage to her lungs is such that even if she made a recovery, they did not believe she would ever breathe on her own naturally, but would need a respirator for the rest of her life. And, that was still a hard decision, but it made it so much easier. My brother and I knew we are not going to watch her open her eyes with a tube. Yeah. And I know it's a dramatic example, but boy, it made an end of life decision a lot easier on my brother and me and our families, because there was no uncertain terms that this is not what she would have wanted. So we were not going to proceed. And that's a dramatic example, but there's other things, what to do with dad's baseball card collection.
Yeah.
What to do with the wedding china that's accumulated over the years. Who should get that? Do other future generations even care about those collections? Preferences change, and that porcelain doll collection that great grandma had that then got passed down to grandma that then got passed down to mom. It could be that we need to look for do a Google search and find out if there's a community online that is passionate about these porcelain dolls, because the collection has been remained intact for all these years. So you certainly don't want to just throw it out or go to Goodwill and say, can you use these dolls? No, they're going to be meaningful to some future collector. But if there was a family member or a beneficiary, that conversation could have been had much, much earlier, so that the family just knew what to do with those pieces of the mess, as you say.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because the collections and nostalgic stuff is so important, right? And the fact that you mentioned, like, you should have those conversations earlier, that really hits home to me, just because a couple of personal items I don't mind sharing. So my in-laws, not too long ago had to be moved into an assisted living facility. It was getting too much for them to be on their own. Well, as people who were married for over 50 years, right? Actually, probably closer to 60 years at the time, they accumulated a lot of stuff, as humans do, right? Some of it is very nostalgic to the kids. Now they have 5 children, they have 3 grandchildren, they have, spouses of children. So there's lots of people who have just shared memories with them over the years. And when all of a sudden you have to move from that house that you've lived in for a long time and where all the stuff is in storage, it's not always out on display. Well, sometimes these things happen quickly, not just a death. It's like, okay, mom and dad are moving to this new place and we've got to dramatically downsize because they are not going to be in 4,000 square foot of home anymore. They're going to a much smaller place. So what do we do with all this stuff? Oh, we can throw some of it out. We can donate some of it, sell some of it. And then of course, who wants what? Well, right now I'm in a state, or not me, but my wife and her brothers. And so they're in a state of emotional unease. This is all coming at them fast. They're worried about mom and dad first and foremost. Stuff, sure, they think about it as they're cleaning out the things, but not everything is top of mind. I think I mentioned this to you in our prep call. There was this little manger set that my mother-in-law would put out every Christmas. My wife loved this thing, and it's not super valuable or anything, but it meant something to my wife. And it's now kind of semi gone missing. Pieces they're not all together. She's got a piece or two of it, but she's like, where the heck is the rest of it? And nobody knows. But to your point, had a conversation happened earlier about hey, listen, Amy, what's important to you? What do you like? Is there anything you want to have for your children and kind of keep in the family or whatever? We'll make sure that they're set aside or labeled Amy or something like that. It would have been so helpful.
Right. I shared with you a sort of dramatic example of that with a client that I had. She had no living relatives in her last years, and she had worked as general counsel at one of the large motion picture studios here in Los Angeles for years and years, amassed a small fortune, prided herself on living way below her means. And so she had substantial assets and a nice home and trinkets and collection of 50 years, like you say. She had told me every year that I've refreshed the red notebook, and I could see when we were doing Zoom meetings, the red notebook was on a shelf behind her desk. And she said, if and when that day comes and you get the call that I didn't wake up, all the answers are in the red notebook. So sadly, I did get that call one day from her childhood best friend. And she asked me, do you want to go look at the notebook together? And so she obviously knew about the notebook as well. We went, and this interesting, eccentric woman had planned out what she called a scavenger wake. Now, what this was everything, the guest list, emails, addresses, everything planned out. There was an A list, a B list, and a C list. And the difference was in the arrival time at the scavenger wake for A, B, and C. A's got to come first, B's an hour and a half later, and C's 2 hours later. And she had a letter to be read on the hour, every hour, to the guests. And letter number 1, and the reminder at the top of every hour was, you are welcome to take anything in this house that has sentimental value or that you think you can hawk on eBay for cash. And she said, but the rule was you only got one car full. So it was only that day. You couldn't go rent a U-Haul and empty out the thing. And so, it started out initially with people kind of thinking, gosh, this is weird, but okay, we want to follow her instructions. And then people really got into it. And it was, as you say, with the manger, people had a nostalgic connection to some of the smallest things. For example, she had a wine cork collection, and it wasn't just a bunch of corks in a basket like some people have. She had put on kind of like a frame. She had these corks and put them in an intricate design, And one person said, I always think of her when I always think about that cork collection. So I'd really like that. And nobody else really cared. Well, somebody else said, did you know she had a corkscrew collection? And these were like old fashioned corkscrews and that person wanted that. So anyways, it was the most unique day as we sort of pillaged her home. But there were some things that had distinct value and other things that just had sentimental value. And yet she, having no living relatives, did have friends, and she knew there might be an emotional or sentimental connection to some of her things, and or somebody might just want to sell the sofa and get some cash for it. So she instructed us to follow her wishes, and it was a really unique thing. But she had done so much pre-planning, the guest list, in fact, she had pre-planned with caterers too. Here's the number of the guy to call, and he's going to bring, he already has the menu. And it was, I'll never forget that. And I thought, good grief, if I had been hit by a car and not survived on my drive into the office this morning, what kind of loose ends am I leaving for my children and my family to have to clean up? So anyways, exaggerating the point, but you understand, having those conversations in advance and doing that pre-planning, so you take the guesswork out at a time when people are emotional, they're grieving, they're perhaps not thinking as clearly as they would be otherwise. Gosh, next time you're all sitting around the table, be bold and say, hey, can we talk about this for 10 minutes? I just want to make sure we're on the same page. Like, hey, Mom, can I get your Gmail password, please? Because if I ever needed to get into your email account, and I know you've got a lot of bills that come in automatically or whatever, I don't want to be locked out of your digital accounts. And I don't even know, do you have the passwords on a sticky on your screen, or is there a notebook, or do you have a password manager? Let's talk about that. Yeah. So much of what we're doing now, we're putting up to the cloud, and it's in digital form. And then somebody's looking for that account statement or that piece of paper, and it doesn't exist because they turned off for, safety reasons, but it's all electronically available, but you have to have access to the passwords. What about those passwords? Do you even know where they are? And
I tell you what, I'm glad you brought that up. We had that teed up for later in the show, but let's dive into it now. Like, so much of our lives is online. And I actually think about this with myself and my wife. Now, she has all my passwords, right? She knows, like, I have only a couple of passwords I use. It's going to be one of these. And we have like a password structure that we use in the family so like, if you know the password to this, you could probably get the password to this. There's some naming conventions that we use for things. But you're right. Like, if you don't use the Gmail account, like if the Gmail account is what you have, all your bills come in. It's what you use to log into Facebook. It's what you use to log into, just go on down the list of all the things you use. Your bank is that where the bank statements come to? It might be a really important piece of information for the most important person in your life to have, so they don't spend weeks after you pass banging their heads against the wall trying to prove that you are indeed deceased, and they have to get access to this. And by the way, they might not even know what your email preferences are, right? Like, think about, like, I don't know about you, Andrew, you've got at least one personal email address probably, and then you've got a work email address, and there might be a second or third email address for other stuff you do, like, oh, I'm on the board of this, or I'm a member, and
that's right.
I've got my alumni, I went to Boston University as an example. I think there's an alumni email address out there for me that I don't use, but I think
I've been sending emails to that one for years, Mike. You never reply.
I think it's there. I'd have to go look it up somewhere, right? So, but there's so much stuff online. Have you found, like, are you and your team using any specific solutions that you provide to or recommendations that you send to your clients, like, hey, please use this so that your loved ones can easily transition should they need it?
So great question. I began about 7-8 years ago exploring online password managers. I had heard that there were programs, and not just the thing built into browsers and so forth, where I thought maybe that's not as secure as something else. So I did, some Consumer Reports kind of research. Yeah. And I found that there were a lot of password managers out there. And the beauty behind those, there's also risks, of course, but the beauty behind it is you have one master password and it unlocks all the other passwords for you.
Right.
So for example, that one master password gets you in, and then you actually use the password manager to log into Facebook or Netflix or Hulu or whatever, okay, your bank. And often those systems, like a bank, might force you to refresh a password because they don't want it to be stale for years and years. So they force you to, or they put in tighter restrictions. You have to add more characters or something. The password managers could actually follow those instructions and create a strong password that no human being would ever want to retype. But with a point and click, it fills it in, it logs you in but it's all controlled by one master password. You can store it locally on a hard drive. You can store it up in the cloud. And some people say, well, gosh, if all your passwords are up in the cloud and they're just wrapped by one master password, that sounds like that could be hacked.
Yeah.
It above my pay grade, and I'm sure it could be. But I tell you, for transitioning things to family members, and they only have one password to remember, and everything's in that electronic file cabinet for them. Really, really helpful. And Mike, one more really practical thing that advisors should be aware of. I recently, in the last year and a half, updated all my estate documents, my trust documents, and my estate attorney that I've been using asked me specifically, what would you like to do with your digital assets, accounts, passwords? And initially thought that kind of an odd question. I said, well, my beneficiaries should have access to it. And she kind of, like, HIPAA provisions changed years ago, and you had to put specific language in your estate documents to allow family members to gain information or have access to your health records. There's best practices today with respect to digital assets, and your trust documents and estate documents should expressly give permission or not to your digital accounts to beneficiaries, family members, your executor. If not, you could end up, as you described previously, in a court battle. The Apple's not going to unlock the iPhone for me, and I know the contacts, I know the email, I know the photos are all stored there. I'm going to have to go to a probate judge and try to argue that I should have it. No, if the document had that express provision and was legally signed off on by the grantor, then problem solved. But I hadn't realized that specific language was necessary, and she recounted case after case of people just getting stonewalled. They eventually, maybe they did get access to it, but why create roadblocks when your family's just trying to settle things and not have frustration at a time when they're already emotional? And so,
it's so funny you mentioned. I like using some sort of password manager. I mean, frankly, even if it's a little black book where you have everything written down and you have it secure and people know where the little black book is.
Exactly.
But I tell you what, the other thing that popped in my mind as you were sharing that information is this thing, right? We all have facial recognition on these now. Well, if you pass away, technically you've seen the jokes on TV and in movies where they hold the phone up the sleeping person's face or whatever to get access to it. But I don't want to have to do that to my loved one.
Right.
Can I have the code to get into your phone? Like, another reason why that might be important, I think, is a lot of services that I use, financial services, have two-factor authentication.
Yeah, exactly.
And the Authenticator app is on this device. So you need to know my password, right? And then you'd also need to get that two-factor authentication code. The only way you're going to get that is if you can get into here. And to your point, Apple will only unlock this with, if you can prove that, you are the person who's supposed to have it.
Right.
What about, this is kind of a funny one. On the digital side, like, there might be stuff you don't want people seeing when you're gone, right? And, Everybody's got some sort of vice. I don't know what that is. I won't cast any shade on anybody, but people have them, right? They have things that maybe they don't want their
Mike,
kids or
you're
their
talking
grandchildren.
about your DraftKings account, aren't
You
you?
got it. There's something,
March
right?
Madness, Madness.
Oh my God. Yeah. Exactly right. It's whatever your thing is, everybody's got something, right? And they may not want to have the children or the grandchildren stumbling upon those things. Have you found scenarios in which, as you're working, I know you're not a state attorney, but like as you're talking with clients, like, hey, there might be stuff that you don't want people to see. What are the instructions for those types of things? Like, right? How do you hide them, or how do you make sure they get destroyed, or whatever that is,
That's a great question, and I'll give you a funny answer, and then I'll tell you what I think the answer is. The funny
Sure.
answer is I have kept a journal, not daily, but
Yeah.
for decades, and it's helps me process how I'm going through life. And I know when I need to journal, and I throw up some words on a page, and all of a sudden I can look at it, and then it helps me process and resolve.
Yeah.
A lot of what I spill on the page is not something that would be decipherable or helpful to other people to read. One, it may not make any sense, or two, it may be me venting about someone or some situation or something that somebody could take very, very personally down the road, whereas
Sure.
that's not my intention. I'm just trying to get it out so that I can move forward, kind of thing. So there's all sorts of stuff in anybody's journal. I have a friend, she's a widow, and she too has been keeping a journal. She told me, and she said, I'll make you a deal. Whichever one of us dies first, go collect the other's journals and destroy them. And I said,
funny.
seriously? And she said, yeah, because otherwise the kids or the people who come in to clean up the house, they're just going to find them, and they'll all start reading, thinking there might be answers to life's questions in there. And she said, I don't want them reading mine, and I'm sure you don't want them reading yours. So she said, I'll make you a deal. I'll destroy yours, or you destroy mine. No questions asked. And so I thought that kind of funny, but it's got a serious point too. Like, what's in your glove compartment in your car? What's in the center console that somebody could look at and go, that's odd.
Yeah.
Whose phone number is that? Or what's that address? Or what? Creates all sorts of questions, and our lives are complicated. Where we leave not just a digital footprint everywhere we go, but we leave a physical footprint in our homes, in our offices, in our garages. And so there probably are things that you think, yeah, that probably should be disposed of. So I think the only safe way is to get that stuff out, to know that it's either in a safety deposit box that nobody's going to have access to, or because I don't think from an estate standpoint that you can carve out assets that you say, well, and don't look at these things. It can be guidelines, but I don't really think that when you're talking about cleaning out a house, you want them to look through drawers. You want them to clean out the closet. You don't want them to sell the home with, sensitive information's left in it that somebody hid in the rafters in the attic. It's going to come out eventually. Somebody's going to find those documents. And so I think just maybe the spring cleaning becomes an annual ritual, and you say, okay, if I died tomorrow, what would I not want anybody to know about me that is part of my physical or digital footprint, and just be very intentional about trying to purge those things.
Yeah. I love the notion of having a partner, if you want to call it not crime's not the right word, but a partner who says, I'm going to come in and dispose of the evidence, if you will.
Right.
Because, the journal is the absolute perfect thing, right? So we know a lot about historical figures from their journals and their letters that they wrote to people. Well, somebody who wanted to learn a lot about you after you passed away could read your journal, whether that's a physical or digital journal, or the emails that you wrote to your friends, or your Facebook messages, or whatever you were sending. And some of those might be, to your point, you venting about like, oh, my dad's driving me crazy or whatever. And it's like, it doesn't mean you don't love the person. It just means you're venting, right? Like I said, we all do
Correct.
it. It's part of the human condition.
Correct.
Or maybe some of it is stuff like, hey, somebody might have been having a kind of a lightweight affair with texting and so forth. And, they don't want that ever coming out because they don't want their children to think, that they weren't a certain way or whatever. So having kind
Right.
of we'll both burn the evidence. Somebody you trust. Really good idea. You know,
Yeah.
you maybe, we hadn't planned on talking about this, but I do want to get your take on it. And if you're not uncomfortable with the take, we'll edit this out. But I recently had somebody on the show who runs a company that focuses on child-free folks, right? So people who don't have children, have no intention on having children in their lives for whatever reason, they just are not going to have children. And estate planning is somewhat different for those folks, I imagine. You mentioned earlier your client who had the let's have the scavenger wake. Have you seen anything distinctly different in your experience for the clients that don't have biological heirs, let's call it that, and those who do, in the planning process and the way that advisors should think about that concept?
Great question. And yes, I have. Those who are in a relationship, whether marriage or just long-standing partnership, the default is we have each other's backs. I know what you want. I'll take care of the matters. And if I go, you know what I want. And so somebody who lives alone or doesn't have any children, maybe can't have children, whatever, I've seen them plan very intentionally around, gosh, who of my friends would I like an income stream to go to, or who of my friends would I like to inherit this from my possessions, or what charity is most meaningful to me? And I don't have to ask anybody's permission, but the residual of my estate, I want to go off to benefit these 3 causes or what have you. Though we talked at the top about having family conversations. Gosh, the person who doesn't have family to consult with, who are their advisors? Is it just the estate attorney that's saying, where do you want your stuff to go when you're gone? That may be a good resource, may spark some ideas. I've seen clients do this. Certainly that center of influence, an estate attorney, a CPA, they've seen lots of different things. Financial advisors see and hear lots of different things as well. And I would say for the family that doesn't have heirs that are readily identifiable, maybe there's a foster child that they've acted as big brother to, or big sister to, or a niece, or a neighbor, not a niece, a neighbor who's has children, and they think, gosh, if I had kids, these are my kids. I never had to have kids because I go to the foster care agency once a week and I play with the kids in their cottage and so forth. Well, then that becomes the surrogate family. But the rest of us postpone those family conversations because we don't want to think about it at times. It's really important for that individual to have those conversations with whomever they are going to designate as an executor of their estate, because that person likely will be saddled with some of those end-of-life decisions, disposition of assets, interpreting the will or the trust, finding those secret collections nobody was supposed to find, etc. So it just takes intentionality. Mike, I think it takes a lot of deliberate intentionality to say, gosh, I'm thinking clearly today. If today was the day, what are the loose ends that I really should have wrapped up? And let me set a timeline and a plan to take care of those things now.
I like that term, intentionality. Because I think it is really gets to the root of this, right? What is my intention for who will get the benefit of like my estate, and because there is benefit, but also what is my intention on who will get the responsibility of my estate, right? Because they are both, right? Like, so
right.
Sometimes it's like, woo, there's millions of dollars here. Fantastic. I will gladly clean out the house. This is fantastic. Thank you very much for leading it. But other times it's like, sure, there is money here, but there's a lot of just weight on this as well. And you want to make sure the people that you're giving the weight to, right, are good with it. Like they have an intentionality about it as well. Like they have a conviction that your wishes are important to them, that they care. And not everybody's wired that way. And I guess you can never know for sure, like, will the person truly care when you're gone? But you hope they will.
and I think it arose in the Jewish tradition, a thing that a couple of my clients have done and shared with me called an ethical will. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with those, but
No, I'm not at all.
We all know what a will is. The ethical will is more a document that's conveying values, could be down a family line, but it's more of values and wishes, characteristics of, if the Langford family had a family crest, what would be the symbols on it, and why those symbols? What does that mean? If there's a diploma, okay, education is important, and blah, blah, blah. Maybe so you think that, gosh, when I'm gone, I can document where I want the stuff to go and who I want to oversee the distribution. But what about the intentionality, the intent, how this wealth was created, what I want the recipients to know about me and what was important in my family upbringing and family line, translating more than just your good looks down to the next generation, but really transferring, a value statement, an ethical will. And I thought, gosh, what a great idea to generations hence, that would be the document that said, gosh, the Langfords really believed in giving back to the community, and that though they made significant wealth, they gave back significant wealth, and they saw it as a responsibility, an obligation to pay it forward, and to, and what a great accompanying document, so that intentionality could at least has a framework behind it, right?
Yeah.
Why did Aunt Lucy want me to have this? Well, if there was a note or an explanation, and my collection of whatever, I want to go to Mike because we always had great conversations about the Dodgers, and we went to games together, and I remember buying him his first foam finger, and so I want you to have the foam finger collection, whatever it is. And
I love it.
Yeah. So I think an ethical will maybe is a way of thinking about how to translate values to subsequent generations, or at least the values that created the wealth in the first place, and of the person who's leaving them to somebody else.
I could not love this anymore. And in fact, I'm stealing this idea and working it into my own life, this ethical will thing. I'd never heard of it until today. And what's really funny is, little known fact about Mike Langford, I worked in a Jewish temple when I was younger as a kid, as a senior in high school. They need a Gentile, a non-Jew, to work in the temple. And I did. I'm very familiar with the Jewish faith and have a very strong affinity for it. So now I'm going to steal this, because I think there's a couple of things here. One, that almost a comedic value is, what you could do with this ethical will is, hey, pre-write some of your eulogy. You want to know why? Because somebody's going to have to do that. And it's a weighty thing. Anytime, if you've ever had to speak, like, again, I speak for a living. I talk all the time. I've got up, I haven't done the eulogy, but I've got up and spoke at several funerals. Man, I don't care who you are. The voice is cracking, the nerves are going, right? It would be nice if somebody wrote like, hey, this is something that Mike really wanted you all to know. He took the time
Absolutely
to write some bullet points out.
Red notebook client, I mean, those letters to be read every hour, gosh, you could hear her voice, sarcasm, wit. Yeah. It was very comforting, actually. At first it sounds maybe a little, eerie, sort of trying to control from beyond the grave. No, it wasn't that at all. Yeah. It was these connection points with regularity that she sat down, thought about, and pre-wrote out. This is what I want read at noon when the catering arrives with the, taquitos or whatever. This is what I want them to hear. Why I love taquitos, and what you're about to, and how great this local Mexican restaurant. And it just was, gosh.
This sounds like my kind of wake, by the way. I want to go.
Yeah, she's not here, but she is here. She is here because she laid this out. And if it was a eulogy to be read, gosh, you can't, maybe you can get the last word in.
Yeah.
You say, well, when you're gone, you're gone. You go, except for that envelope that says to be read at the funeral.
What's really funny is you talk about this ethical will concept, this intentionality, this concept of like passing on values to the next generation or to those just who might inherit your wealth. This is a common thing that wealthy folks, especially first generation wealth, a fear, a concern that they have is that their children and grandchildren will not carry on the values, and whether those values are the work ethic that built the wealth or the caring, to your point of being a good steward of the community and giving back and whatever, however you want to define that community. So I honestly think that financial advisors should, again, not that everyone is an estate attorney, but as the conversations come up about estate and the wealth that's there, talking about these types of things, like, have you considered either having conversations while you're still alive about these things, and then and making sure that when you pass, that you enshrine those some way. It seems like a really valuable conversation to have.
It really is. And I think financial advisors are one of the unique advisor professionals in a family's life that could actually moderate a conversation like that. I'm just fact finding because I expect I'll be some of the institutional knowledge that crosses generations. And I want to make sure I understand exactly what I worked with your grandfather and now I'm working with your parents, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page and we understand the family's intentions and values behind the wealth that's been created and that's going to go down the family line. And the advisor can be that. It might be uncomfortable or awkward for a parent to bring up. They may, well, if I start talking about that, they're going to be thinking about how much it's going to be in their trust fund when I'm gone. And that's going to sap the motivation from them to be productive citizens on their own and establish their own career. The advisor can just ask the questions, convene a Zoom meeting of all the kids all over the country and their families and just say, hey, Mike, what is on your family crest? Yeah. Okay, you don't have one. Let's hypothetically create one. What are 4 distinctives about the Langfords that those are just non-negotiables? This is who we are as a family, and have that conversation. I think it will surface dreams, hopes, fears, values, all of the above. And gosh, better to have those conversations when you're all together and you can laugh a little, you could cry, but this is who we are. What a great, kind of glue that you can help as an advisor provide to a family to just say, gosh, we are really blessed and we do have responsibilities and we do value education and we do value, boy, I think those are inspiring conversations and put a little fuel in the tank about why it's so important to stay on top of portfolio matters and have objectives clearly defined for each of the accounts and understand because it's a bigger purpose, not just don't outlive the money. No, you're not going to outlive the money. It's going to keep going. And how do you want it to keep going and why? Yeah.
Well, we've all heard that story of rags to riches to rags, right? It does happen, right? Because again, something didn't translate. It can be work ethic didn't translate because the parents worked really hard and had to be conservative with their finances and intentional with all their work and so forth. But the children and the grandchildren got to live the spoils of all that work and live a much more comfortable life. And as a result, they didn't have to learn work ethic and so forth. I joke, I throw myself in this in some ways. I had a lot of chores growing up. Growing up in the 70s and 80s, during the energy crisis, my parents converted the house from oil heat to wood burning stove to heat the house. I know I sound like I grew up like in the Wild West, but I didn't. It was that was actually very common because a lot of people heated their house with oil in the Northeast, and during the energy crisis, they converted to wood stoves. So I was like one of those kids, loading the wood rack every day and all this type of stuff. It was legit chores. But my kids have had none of that type of chores. It's kind of like clean up around the house a little bit comparatively to the stuff that I grew up doing. And every once in a while, I worry about it. Are they going to be okay? They are okay. But it's just one of those funny things where you think, what type of work ethic types of things should you be passing on? and can they be replicated in other ways? But you could definitely see if my kids had to like do that kind of work, it would be an adjustment. Let's put it.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a friend, her husband grew up on a farm, and it was a
Yeah.
dairy farm. It was a working dairy farm. And he was waking up at 4 o'clock every morning, and he was schlepping bales of hay and bringing in pails of milk. And he was part of that family's business. That was who they are. They're farmers and dairy farmers. And, those of us who live in a home in the suburbs where we don't even let the kids ride their bicycle to school because we're, so concerned about their safety, which is understandable, unfortunately. It's a different deal. So back to the intentionality phrase, figuring out what a family stands for. We just came off the Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting, and Warren Buffett, 93 years old, pontificating for 5.5 hours on every topic under the sun, from succession at Berkshire to artificial intelligence to everything. And voice is getting a little gravelly with the years, understandably, but boy, the wisdom of a guy like Warren Buffett or Charlie Munger, the values, the perspectives, they are so well documented because he has this open forum every year, and every interview for the most part, but every year. And I think, gosh, if a guy like that's going to go so public, and he's given away whatever 99% of his wealth to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I mean, he's giving it away. So he's an open book. And I think sometimes our families are, locked books. We're locked to diaries, and we need to get the key out and, at least with some regularity, have those fun, open, sometimes scary family conversations about what's important and what it means to be a member of this family and what the expectations are going forward. And I think, a guy like Warren Buffett's made it pretty public for the rest of us to understand where he stands on certain things and so forth. Gosh, if he can be that open about everything he's about, why can't we be that way with our kids, with our parents, with our grandparents?
I love it. I love it. I know we don't have much time left together, but I wanted to touch on like two quick things. One, we talked briefly in our prep call about an area that's of keen interest to me. My parents got divorced late in life and they got remarried. So one of the interesting things is remarriage. How does it affect estate planning, right? Later in life remarriage. It's one thing for somebody to get divorced and get remarried, say in their 30s or 40s, but like when it's in their 70s, I would imagine that it can kind of throw some of the estate planning stuff up in the air and cause you to have to make some massive adjustments. What are some things that people who got remarried later in life might want to think about?
Great question. And it does happen more and more. Unfortunately, divorce is a reality, but people do find other relationships down the road. And whether it results in a marriage or not, making sure both parties understand, what am I bringing materially into this relationship, and what kind of separation is or should there be between those things? If somebody has children and their primary concern is I want the wealth that I accumulated during my working years and that I inherited to stay within my biological family line, that's what estate attorneys do, right? They can document that clearly. If somebody's a big difference, and I've got quite a few divorced couples as clients, and they have separate accounts, separate property accounts, and then they commingle. They've got a checking account or whatever that both parties contribute to, or that they've delineated. You cover the mortgage, I cover the household expenses, this kind of thing, and they've created some rules about how they both contribute to the wealth. And it's important to work with an estate attorney to understand how those rules do or do not result in commingling of assets or blurring of lines that, well, they weren't working at the time, but it kind of was mostly his income or her income that was assets that were used to fund the lifestyle. So if that relationship were to end, could somebody make an argument that really all of the income is coming from one side and it should continue that way because this was the agreement we had. I wasn't going to contribute. I was just going to be enjoying the fruits of their career and their labor all those years. So people put up some rules around it to make sure that they're protected and that their heirs are protected, if that's the intent, is to translate it down the family line. But it's really important because people are now working longer, right?
Yeah.
So there could be earned income during that marriage, even when somebody's in their 70s or 80s. They could be working as a financial advisor, and that income during the time of that relationship that's earned is going to be considered in California community property. So maybe there's no question about that, but what you brought into the marriage or the relationship and what the other party, it needs to be an open conversation. And Mike, going back to somebody who's getting married for the first time, having those conversations, it's like premarital counseling. What do you mean you didn't want to have kids? Okay, that should have come up before now.
Nobody think about this? Like that happens a lot in marriages. Children become a byproduct.
How would you feel, Mike, if my father-in-law came to live with us because I don't want him to go in a home, or we don't have enough money? Boy, that maybe it would be a deal breaker, or maybe it wouldn't, but at least to not have a couple suddenly stumble into that conversation when that event happens and say, well, wait a minute, we never talked about this. So I think it's just open communication, frequent and often, is a good antidote.
I 100% agree. And I think if you're an advisor, if you find out that your client is getting remarried, like later in life, make sure you say, hey, let's make sure we get you back with the estate attorney and walk through some things. Like, so for instance, you're getting remarried in your 70s, you have adult children, you have grandchildren who may feel like when something happens, like they might be in their brain going, okay, I'm going to get mom and dad's house. Well, now it's just mom's house because, dad is no longer there. Well, what happens if they're married? Like the way common law works, is usually like the spouse gets everything, non-probate, just goes directly to the spouse. Well, is that still true if their spouse has only been around for like a year or something like that? So, you might want to get with your estate attorney and walk through all these iterations of like what ifs, even though nobody likes to talk about it. It just is what it is.
And Mike, there are lots of resources in that regard. Lots of resources. Not that I'm a member, but I do qualify for AARP, and they've got resources.
I keep getting
for this
mail from these people.
demographic 50 and over that encounter these issues, both with family care, but also remarriage, divorce, those kinds of things. Our own firm, we've got a thing called Trusted Advice Through Life's Key Moments, and obviously, birth, death, divorce, marriage, those are key moments. Birth of a child. And there's lots of resources, but people have to go looking for it, and they have to talk to that estate attorney who encounters this every day as part of their job.
Yeah. Love it. 100% agree. All right. We got like a couple of minutes left. Any other trends that are top of mind for you? They're like, hey, listen, we've been encountering this here at DA Davidson frequently. We want to make sure that advisors have these things top of mind. Any newer estate planning trends or things?
Well, I'll tell you the thing that keeps coming up is what our industry calls senior investor protections. With us living longer, which is wonderful, it sometimes comes with a price, and sometimes it's memory loss or diminishment of capacity, what have you. And that's a critical conversation and a critical dimension to be explored and thoroughly talked about as a family or as a couple, because having trusted contacts, for example, on you could be the breadwinner and you're the one who talks to the banker all the time and your spouse doesn't. Well, what if the banker is suspecting that these decisions seem inconsistent with everything he's done for the previous 10 years, and it seems like or it's a widow or widower, and suddenly the influence of another person in their life seems a little heavy-handed and maybe a little bit. Having trusted contacts and a framework for the advisory team to be able to reach out to family members and just say, I'm suspecting there's kind of some coercion to do this following thing, and I don't think Mike wants to be buying payphones in Mexico right now with his IRA. That doesn't seem part of the strategy. And then having a family member who can intervene at that point and just say, wait, I've noticed some things too. Let me put the brakes on, let me convene the family. And I think, gosh, with all these conversations we've been talking about, somebody may have diminished capacity while they're still living, right? Yeah. And you say, gosh, what did dad really want? Now he's in a memory care facility and he doesn't recognize me. I waited too long. I wish we had these conversations. And it's a reality, Mike. I hear it every single day as we've got whatever they're saying every day, 10,000 baby boomers are turning 65 and they're entering the distribution phase of life. Hopefully they're going to be healthy and living for another 30 years. But if there's some diminishment of mental capacity, the long goodbye, as they call it, gosh, have those conversations sooner, because just because they're around physically doesn't mean that loved one is going to be around mentally. And I think that's the most new thing that I encounter every single day, aside from the digital assets and stuff that we've already covered.
Well, I tell you what, there's some connection between those. I mean, number one, I want to say, I heard the stat recently, we have added 30 years of life expectancy in the last 100 years.
Amazing.
So amazing. So you're expected to live into your 80s now. If you're a healthy person who's like in your 50s, whatever, we can expect you to get well into your 80s, assuming, again, just actuarial tables tell us this. But we've also introduced in the last 15, 20 years, things that no generation has ever had to deal with, which is like all this digital stuff, to your point, right? Yep. So like the life has gotten more complex. The criminals and have gotten way more sophisticated at their way to trick somebody. So as an advisor, to your point, make sure you're keeping tabs on your clients' accounts, of course, but make sure you're talking to them about their interactions with other people and how it's going and so forth. You want to make sure that they're not taken advantage of.
Yep.
This has been fantastic. So we'll make sure we get everything from you and D.A. Davidson linked up in the show notes, as always. Anything else you want to tell people about? Make sure they go check out on the site or where else you're doing cool stuff.
I think trusted advice during life's key moments, it's evergreen, but to think about those milestones in your clients' lives. And because you have a book of business and have dealt with families that have encountered that situation before the other family has, use that vast repository of experience you've built up through these relationships to have those trusted conversations with the families before they're in a time of critical need and duress, when they, it may be too late. It may be me at the ICU being asked for
hopefully
an advance directive or my insurance card. That was just unfortunate, but needless sort of irritation at a time when I just wanted to be present for my sick mother. So I really enjoyed the conversations, Mike, as always. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to weigh in on these topics.
My pleasure. You're always welcome back. Great seeing you. Thank you.
Likewise. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much for listening to and/or watching this episode of the Modern Financial Advisor Podcast. It's always fantastic to have you with us. Huge props to my man, Andrew Crowell, for coming back on the show. He's always so generous with his time and his insights. I really appreciate it. And I hope you got a lot out of the show as well. As I mentioned at the top of the show, please make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform and let us know what you think. Love to hear from you. podcast@finservmarketing.com. Okay, that's all I have for you today. Be nice to each other. We'll see you next time on the Financial Advisor Podcast. See you. Bye.